Unity of Houston is an inclusive church where we seek to understand and live the teachings of Jesus and other spiritual masters. At Unity, we welcome all people from all spiritual paths and every walk of life. We celebrate the diversity of our city and of our world, and we teach love, tolerance, and oneness, seeking to live in harmony with open minds and open hearts.
Wherever you are in your spiritual path, you are always welcome at Unity. Join us and discover that the life of your dreams is already within you.
Are practicing fearless compassion. Are you willing to practice fearless compassion tonight? I feel like yes, we feel like we've started. Right? We've really started with our meditation, transforming sorrow into compassion, opening up our hearts. So often we can be overwhelmed, and we find out so many statistics about suffering. We could get into that all night, talking about people who are suffering physically, emotionally, mentally, all kinds of conditions, and it can feel like too much. And we recognize just how big our heart is, because we remember that in truth we're spirit, right? And the heart that we open up with to take in those sorrows and transform them into compassion is the same heart of Jesus, of Buddha, of Kuan Yin, of Mother Mary, a heart that can hold it all in love. So we're continuing our series of A Path with Heart, Jack Kornfield's wonderful book. And this week's topic is generosity, codependence, and fearless compassion. So what do these three things have to do with each other? Well, we will find out. So the word compassion, let's look at that first. So compassion comes from the Latin word compati, which means to suffer with. To suffer with. So we can hold another person suffering with them. It doesn't mean that we have to suffer. We can hold that space with them. We can listen. We can be a loving presence, a loving ear, hold them in prayer. Compassionate generosity. So here's where compassion and generosity come together. That, according to Jack Kornfield, is the true foundation of our spiritual life, because it involves letting go. To give generously of our compassion, we have to let go, right? Because if we're not letting go, then we're not giving generously of our compassion. We're attached to an outcome. We have an expectation that that person will change, be fixed, take our advice, do something differently. This is a real, true compassion that lets go and is open to all that they are and all the experience that they're in, and to ourselves, with them in their experience and in our own suffering and our own pain. When Mother Teresa was training her nuns, they were serving the poorest of the poor people. She gave them this advice: let them eat you up. Can you imagine? Let them eat you up, just giving so generously of your compassion, so fully to the experience. Jesus, our master teacher and way shower, when he called on his disciples, he asked them to sell their possessions, give to the poor, and then follow me. Can you imagine the spiritual work that would be involved in that? One, Jesus calling you, cool, and then, also you've got to sell all of your possessions, give that money to the poor, and then follow me. That the level of faith that would take to walk with just open arms, open heart to the world, and trust and faith. That's this cultivating of, you can use that as an image for cultivating compassionate generosity in that way. There's a story that the Buddha told of a past life that he had, where he saw a mother tigress and her two cubs, and the tigress wasn't able to feed the cubs. She wasn't able to bring them enough food for them to survive. And in his compassion, he jumped off of a cliff to sacrifice himself so that they could eat. That is an amazing level of compassion that this soon-to-be Buddha, or Buddha-to-be, previous lifetime, that he showed in that situation. It's another story I wanted to share with you from Jack Kornfield about His Holiness Karmapa, and he is one of the great leaders of Tibetan Buddhism. He visited America to give his teachings and his blessings, his instructions, and he was said to embody the Buddha of compassion. Buddha of compassion. So he led this ceremony, and there were about 1,000 participants who attended this, and he was teaching them how to cultivate compassion, that when the student breathes in the pain of the world and breathes out this generosity of compassion. So it was much like the practice that we did in our meditation tonight. And at the end, there was an older psychologist who stood up, and he asked him, should we really take it all in? Or what if we don't know what the person in front of us may be experiencing? What if they have cancer? Should I take cancer in? And he said, yes, you take it all in. You take in the pain of the world to touch your heart and to turn it into compassion. And what no one in the room knew was that Karmapa himself had been diagnosed with cancer. And he knew that in that workshop, but his teaching was uncompromising, that you take the pain, the sorrow into your heart and you turn it into compassion. And he died a year later from that experience. So there's this letting go. And part of this letting go in practicing compassionate generosity involves a recognition of the interdependence of our lives with each other. That is why we express compassion for each other, because we live interdependently with each other rather than dependently, right? Interdependently. And that sense of interdependence is born from a very deep respect for ourselves and for the others in our experience. So many of us come to a spiritual practice with some woundedness, some healing that we have yet to do, and it can be unconscious, we can be unaware of it. And when we go to compassion, it can be mixed with fear, it can be mixed with insecurity, mixed with dependence. AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and other 12-step groups talk about the term codependence to describe misusing our generosity. So we can be unskillful when we try to help others, when we create a dependent type of situation. So the classic case in AA would be the spouse who protects the other spouse who is the alcoholic or is, dependent on, chemically dependent, and covers up for their drinking or their abuse to try to protect them. But this helping is not actually helping the partner. It's only enabling them to continue the cycle of drinking and to allow them to escape the painful consequences of their actions. And so this is a helping that is not done from an open heart of faith. This is done from a fear of facing our spouse's problem, and that coming out into the open and people finding out about it, the truth, and perhaps that truth coming out might end the relationship. There's all kinds of dimensions to that experience of codependence. So how do we know if our actions are truly compassionate or if they're codependent? So checking in with yourself, compassion, codependence. Are you afraid to tell the truth in that relationship, in that situation? Are you afraid to set limits in that relationship? Are you afraid to say no in that relationship? So recognizing that generosity that may be originally healthy can also turn into something compulsive. And an example that Jack Kornfield gives is this woman, or really, it could be any woman who gives of themselves with an intention to volunteer. Of course, it could be a man either. To volunteer to give their service to their spiritual center, to a nonprofit, to any kind of organization where there's just this constant giving, and that this person is not giving back to themselves. And so they end up finding themselves where their body is depleted, they're emotionally, mentally not in good health, and even their self-esteem is not in a good place. They've given so much, they haven't given any to themselves. So really knowing that balance and recognizing, am I giving and neglecting of myself and my own needs? Really, when we love the Lord our God with all our heart, our soul, and our mind, that we remember the Lord our God is within, right? So we must tend to God in our hearts, right? God of our own being, so that we can have a full well to give and to share generously. And then he gives an example of men who tend to not say no to things, and that they build up resentments of that over time, and they forget how they got that way because they just kept doing things they didn't want to do. So recognizing compassion, codependence, and can show up in our lives in different ways. One of the ways of finding this balance of compassion or codependence, and really finding that true act of compassion, is a story that the Buddha tells of a family of acrobats, which is somewhat ironic, right? They come to him to find some balance in their relationship. And it's a grandfather and a granddaughter who travel around and do this acrobatic act together. And they ask the Buddha, what is the best way for them to safeguard each other? Because it's dangerous to do these acrobatics, and they want to take the best care of each other. And the grandfather says, well, I feel that it's best if I look after my granddaughter and she looks after me. And that would be the best way for our act to move forward with the best safety. And the granddaughter asked the Buddha if this wasn't backward. She felt that what her grandfather was bringing was backward, and they obviously had been discussing this back and forth, which is why they came to the Buddha. She said, wouldn't it be better for us to care for ourselves? And in that way, we safeguard the other person, and our act will prosper. And the Buddha, after listening to this young girl, responded, for a very young girl, you're very wise. Wise. If you as a grandfather guard yourself with care and pay attention to what you do, you will also guard the safety of your grandchild. And if you as a child guard yourself with awareness, with care and respect, then you guard both of yourselves and those around you. So this is a story about how important it is to mind yourself, to care for yourself, to care for your heart, and the necessity of creating that balancing act in our relationships with each other. So we remember our own role. We can get lost in the care of another person and forget ourselves. We can disregard the consequences of our own actions and get into codependence and unhealthy compassion. And so the ground of having this fearless compassion that we are cultivating in ourselves is to have a healthy sense of self. Have a healthy sense of self. And so it arises out of honoring yourself, of your own fears, your own sorrows that come up, your own insecurities, recognizing that you experience this along with others. This is a communal, human experience that we have. And to come into compassion for yourself, not out of a fear or a pity, but a response in your heart and an awareness of your interdependence with all things. And what a gift it is that We have others in our lives that can do things that we can't do, and we can do some things that they can't do, and that we are interdependent of each other. So compassion, when we feel compassion in a situation, sometimes it can be hard to not do something. I honor my own feelings of wanting to help. Oh, I feel the pain, I feel the struggle, I want to help, and to be a listening ear and to be present. And sometimes out of that listening, out of that love, out of holding that in our hearts, we may feel called to action. We may not. We may not. It is when we're present with it, then we can really discern rather than jumping into a reaction, when we can respond from the heart. And so this cultivates a compassion that flows rather than a compassion that is so responsive. So I want to share one more story with you before I close my message tonight, and it's about how facing suffering and a struggle in life can open your heart when you embrace it rather than resist it. So this is a story that Jack shares about. He read about in an article about a couple who wasn't able to conceive a child, and so they chose to adopt a child from a poor country because they felt that was the most generous thing that they really could do. And they adopted this child from India. And when they got the child, it was a beautiful baby boy. He was 2 months old, and just so precious. They're so happy to have him. And as he started to grow, they learned that he had a number of health problems that they hadn't been aware of. At first, they discovered that he was profoundly deaf and that he would never hear. And second, they discovered that he had cerebral palsy. And while this wouldn't affect his intelligence, that it could cripple him. And so they got him a small wheelchair. So when he was old enough to walk, he had a way to get around with his wheelchair. And after this, they created a network of support with other parents who had deaf children, disabled children. And they were concerned that their young son was going to be isolated. So they did something that was pretty amazing. They wrote to India and they said, this child that we adopted from you, he is deaf, and we would like to adopt another child that's deaf from your country and bring that child here so that they can have each other. And he said in the article, there's this picture of the two of them with these broad smiles, arms around each other, and they're just so happy. They're just hugging each other, happy to be together. And so imagine this in your own life. Imagine yourself if you were to adopt a child and learn that the child had a disability, and to open your heart in such a way, without self-pity, without fear, and say, I have a child like this, and now send me another one. This is radical, generous compassion. Passionate generosity. That's a fearless compassion that can face suffering in your life and learn from it and take it in and allow it to transform you and open your heart even wider. So I invite you this evening to just check in with yourself and notice, where do you fear letting go? And are you tending to yourself? Are you recognizing that as you let go with a heart of compassion, that we are all interdependent and connected, that we truly are one, and our compassion heals and blesses ourselves and blesses each other and the world. Namaste.
Thank you for watching this message today. I'd like to invite you to join us in person here on campus at Unity of Houston for Sunday morning or Wednesday evening services. If you can't be with us here on our campus, you can still join us live on Facebook or on our website, unityhouston.org, Sunday mornings at 11 a.m. Central.